Hello, fellow trainers! I entered a global challenge with a top 4 Koraidon team from the San Antonio Regionals. We used Andrew Figueroa's team to get some awesome battles that I hope you'll enjoy. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Alrighty, let's get into the first battle. My opponent starts off with the Chi-Yu Fluttermane. I start off with my own Fluttermane and Ogerpon. This early into the battle, I decided to go for the Icy Wind to get some speed control, but unfortunately, he's able to outspeed, goes for his own Icy Wind, lowers the speed of both my Mons. Unfortunately, losing that speed tie is going to lead to some big trouble, as Chi-Yu is then able to go for the Heat Wave, knock out my Ogerpon, and do big damage to Fluttermane. After all this, I'm finally able to go for my own Icy Wind, but it's too late. The damage is already done, my opponent's off to a huge lead. The good thing is my new Pokemon is not going to have a speed drop, so I use this opportunity to go into my Koraidon, get that sun up, and start boosting everybody with their photosynthesis. On the next turn, I'm expecting a boosted Heat Wave and a Fairy move into my Koraidon, so I'm going to decide to switch my Fluttermane out, get the Resistance for the Fire move, and Terra my Koraidon. Unfortunately, you're going to see a blunder in my team building right here, as I decide to switch out my Fluttermane and go into my Entei, but unfortunately I forgot to switch his ability. Despite all of this, I decided to go for the Terra Fairy on my Koraidon to protect him from any potential incoming Fairy moves. With our new Chandelier hat, we're now ready to go and do some big damage. Koraidon lets out a mighty roar as we then see the Fluttermane goes for the Protect. Thankfully, Koraidon and I have other plans. As we turn our sights on the fish, go for the collision course, take him out in one shot. With Chi-Yu down, we're able to secure a nice early lead in this first battle. My opponent then reveals their next Pokemon, the Chien-Pao. I know Terra Ghost is fairly common on Chien-Pao, so I decided to mix up my strategy a little bit, not wanting to go for the obvious collision course. As my opponent then reveals exactly that, the Terra Ghost Chien-Pao. With his new hat and a mighty roar, the Chien-Pao then goes for the Sucker Punch, gets some solid damage on Koraidon and reveals his Life Orb. Koraidon is able to retaliate with the Scale Shot, and thanks to that loaded dice, we get the multiple hits. And after 4 clean shots, we're able to take out the Chien-Pao and get a speed boost. Thanks to Team Preview, I'm assuming my opponent's last Pokemon is their own Koraidon, which I should now be able to outspeed no problem. We also know that thanks to the Icy Wind earlier in the battle, Entei will be able to outspeed right here, which will allow my own Koraidon to stick around for a little longer, as we go for that Sun boosted Sacred Fire and take out the Fluttermane. My opponent then goes into their last Pokemon, the Koraidon. Gets the boost from the sun, but as we said previously, we're going to be able to outspeed and take him out no problem. As we fire off the Scale Shot, get the multiple hits, and eventually take out the Koraidon and secure the win. Good game, and now on to the next battle. Alright, game number 2 starts, and my opponent leads with the Chi-Yu Amoonguss, as I start off with my own Ogerpon and Fluttermane. Expecting a Spore and Heat Wave, I go with the Protect with Fluttermane, and hope to grab an early KO on the fish, but he decides to mix it up, goes for the Dark Pulse, gets good damage on my Ogerpon. Ogerpon is then able to retaliate with the Ivy Cudgel, one-shots the Goldfish. Up 1-0, we're then able to see that Fluttermane is able to stay awake for at least one more turn. My opponent then switches into the Big Dog, who immediately looks like a threat with that defense boost. Knowing I can't do much this turn, I decided to go for some speed control, so I start off with the Follow Me with my Ogerpon, follow that up with the Icy Wind, which thankfully connects with both targets, lowering their speed. My eventual plan is to bring in one of my heavy hitters and take out the dog before it becomes a big problem. Unfortunately, that requires me to lose my Ogerpon, who then goes down to the Heavy Slam. With the score now tied up, I expect the Amoonguss to put my Fluttermane to sleep, but he decides to break my Focus Sash with the Pollen Puff. Thankfully, Fluttermane barely takes any damage, which then allows me to go into the big threat, the Pressure Entei. After exuding all that pressure, my opponent gets so nervous that he goes for the Terra Water on his Amoonguss, expecting that fire move. I thought he might consider Terra into Zamazenta, but he makes a safe, correct play, going for the Terra on the Amoonguss. After Amoonguss gets on his nice hat, we go for the Protect on our Fluttermane. My opponent appreciates that move so much that he does the same on his dog. I now finally go for that Sacred Fire, but now as a water type, Amoonguss eats that up and barely takes any damage, retaliates with the Spore, putting Entei to sleep. With Entei sleeping, I'm not quite sure if I could take out the Amoonguss with a Moonblast, which leads me to go for that Terra Fairy on my Fluttermane. Fluttermane shows off the new hat, but is that enough power to take out the Amoonguss? Fluttermane then fires off the Terra boosted Moonblast, we connect with the Amoonguss and thankfully take him out. If Amoonguss was able to tank that hit and then put my Fluttermane to sleep with the Spore, we would have been in some big trouble, but thankfully we secured the KO. Finally, Zamazenta goes for that Body Press and gets that huge damage on Entei, as my opponent goes into their final and last Pokemon, the Fire Ogerpon. Knowing I can outspeed it and wanting to secure speed control for the rest of the battle, I go for the Icy Wind, thankfully connect and get that double speed lower. Despite all that, Entei stays asleep and unfortunately is about to be taken out by the Ogerpon, who then goes for the Ivy Cudgel, connects on Entei, and takes him out. Last but not least, the dog goes for the Body Press on my Fluttermane, and despite being resisted, gets that huge damage. I then go into my final Pokemon, the Koraidon, who's able to set up the sun and also activate the photosynthesis of my Fluttermane. Despite all that, this battle is not over yet. Not quite sure if we could one-shot the Ogerpon, and I want to preserve my Fluttermane, so I go for the Protect here. Unfortunately for my opponent, he does the same and goes for the Protect on his Zamazenta, but that's not who we're attacking. As Koraidon goes for that Collision Course, we connect with the Ogerpon, but he's just able to hang on. With that little bit of health left, he goes for the Ivy Cudgel, but thankfully we protected the Fluttermane. My opponent then forfeits. Good game. Alright, let's start off battle number 3. My opponent goes with the Latios Tornadus. I go Raging Bolt Fluttermane. Not wanting to lose my Raging Bolt and expecting the Prankster Tailwind, I go for the immediate turn 1 Terra Fairy on Raging Bolt. With the increased speed, I'm expecting a potential Draco that could one-shot my Raging Bolt, so we put the Heart on his head in order to prevent that. We then see Tornadus go for that priority Tailwind, doubling his team's speed, but you'll see my prediction was wrong as my opponent then goes for the Luster Purge, hits Fluttermane, gets some good damage. Fluttermane doesn't mind that special defense low as I'm then able to retaliate with the Moonblast, take out Latios in one shot. I then followed it up with a Thunderbolt from Raging Bolt, hit Tornadus, take him out in one shot. After that, we're off to a great 2-0 lead. My opponent then reveals their next Pokemon, the shiny Big Dog, and their last Pokemon, the Rillaboom. The dog gets the Dauntless Shield defense boost as Rillaboom sets up that grass. But will that be enough to make a comeback? We shall see. I then go for the Protect with my Fluttermane, anticipating a potential Grassy Glide, which thankfully I get correct, allowing Fluttermane to stay around for just a little longer. I then followed it up with the Thunderclap on the dog. I probably could have got a little more damage with the Thunderbolt, but wanted the assured damage as I tanked the Heavy Slam. Then we all relax and get a little bit of health back from the grass terrain. Expecting another Grassy Glide, I then switch out my Flutter Mane and go into my Entei, who unfortunately still has the pressure of but my opponent actually decides to switch it up, goes for the Heavy Slam, which Entei takes no problem, follows it up with a Wood Hammer, gets that big damage on Raging Bolt, but I'm just able to hang on. After just holding on, Raging Bolt retaliates with a Thunderbolt, gets some good damage on the dog. At this point of the battle, I'm really just trying to secure as much damage as I can with Raging Bolt while getting some KOs with Entei. Unfortunately, my opponent's going to make a great play right here as he goes for the Terra Fire with the Rillaboom. This allows him to put the Chandelier on his head, which is going to really help him going forward in this battle. My opponent follows it up with the Protect on the dog, which is going to completely stuff my Raging Bolt's attack, as I try to go for the Thunderclap, do absolutely nothing. Rillaboom then reveals the high horsepower, but I get a little luck as Entei avoids the attack, retaliate with the Sacred Fire, get some solid damage. Thanks to some good plays by my opponent, I'm unable to close out the game and the battle goes on. And after all this, the Tailwind finally goes away. Despite that, my opponent is able to outspeed, go for the Heavy Slam, and finally take out Raging Bolt. Probably could have snuck in a little more damage with the Thunderclap, but it's okay. Raging Bolt did his job. I followed that up with the Sacred Fire on the Shield Dog, but he's just able to hang on. Rillaboom is then able to connect with the high horsepower, but Entei just survives. I'm now left with Flutter Mane and Koraidon as my last two Pokemon, as I decide to start off with the Flutter Mane. And unfortunately for me, that grassy terrain is still there, which allows him to go for the priority Grassy Glide, take out my Flutter Mane. Now tied 2-2, my opponent follows it up with the Body Press onto my Entei, takes out my dog. And just like that, my opponent takes the lead. My opponent then gets one last little bit of recovery from the grassy terrain before it finally disappears. I then go into my final Pokemon, the Koraidon. Get that Harsh Sun going, and now we have a big decision to make. Do we take out the dog or the Rillaboom? As my opponent decides to play it safe, goes for the Protect. As I decide to use Collision Course right into the Protect. Score 1 from my opponent. Rillaboom decides to follow it up with the high horsepower, gets some good chip damage. I try to prioritize the Legend, but unfortunately he gets the double Protect, and you'll see I go for another Collision Course right into the Protect. That's 2-0 for my opponent. Rillaboom then follows up with another high horsepower, which it looks like I could take one more. I'm then finally able to outspeed, go for the Collision Course, take out the shielded dog. Now tied up, we're both down to our last Pokemon. Rillaboom then goes for one more high horsepower. Koraidon's just able to hang on. Thankfully for me, this allows me to go for one more Collision Course on the Rillaboom and clean up the game.